All right, welcome to the first video on the channel for year 2023. I told myself I would do a few videos a day to kind of get out there, but it's been a slow start to the year. There's lots going on right now. I wanted to stick to more positive stuff, at least start the day off with a positive video, maybe talk some lifestyle, health, fitness, sports, pop culture, that kind of thing. However, I'm starting with a political video. Recently, I guess it's just basically about the conservative movement in Canada in general. Myself, I'm 46 years old. I'm about to turn 46 in March. And the Republican / conservative movement over the past 30 years, 40 years, has been really interesting, especially in Canada. And this is kind of what I want to just talk about today. When I was a kid in the 80s, we had Brian Mulroney, and we are a very east-west eccentric country. We're very split eastern values and western values. Western was very prairie, and eastern was your Ontario, your elites. And then the coastal BC was a little bit different, and your your Atlantic region obviously was a little bit differently, and then Quebec was its own entity. So as you can tell, we were already very split politically and economically in those regions. And Alberta is separate from everybody else as well. So we had Brian Mulroney, who is a progressive conservative, and he brought in things like the free trade agreement with Canada, US, and Mexico, which was heavily scrutinized, but I think the main purpose of that was to encourage trade, fair trade, with our closest neighbors and closest allies. So that was a polarizing topic, but some pros, some cons. But the other things that he had issues with was, for example, Meech Lake. I didn't know too much about that, but Meech Lake at the time, which was, again, a lot of business heading towards eastern provinces and not a lot of love for the West. There was even a referendum on whether Quebec would split. We changed our dollar bill to a loonie. That became a big issue. All of a sudden, the not Iraq War, but in the late 80s, early 90s, it became Operation Desert Shield, which eventually turned into Operation Desert Storm. Again, you have a conservative prime minister, and you find yourself in a war out of nowhere, dealing with a war, having to deal with the French separating from English Canada, dealing with a fluff issue like changing the dollar, promising companies like Boeing in Manitoba big contracts to win elections, but then moving those contracts to Ontario and Quebec. So basically, our conservative government was very much pro-East, didn't work very much for the West, and had to deal with your basic right-wing issues. And out of nowhere in 1994, there was vote irregularities, and they kicked him out immediately. So next thing you know, Brian Mulroney, within weeks, is kicked out. They bring in Kim Campbell, and then within 4 or 5 months, they have a new election, and that brings in the corrupt Liberals. Does that not sound familiar? And the corrupt Liberals come in, and they're going to reform our healthcare system. Does this sound familiar? They're going to reform our military. Sound familiar? They're going to reform gun laws. Sound familiar? And they basically money laundered through something called ad scam to Quebec. So again, they funneled money to Quebec. Sound familiar? And they then have the gun registry, which cost them, I think it was like $2 billion, just stupid money. And they couldn't decide what a gun was. depending on a handgun, a shotgun, your old grandfather's hunting rifle compared to like an AK-47. Like it was just a debacle. They couldn't keep the database, and I don't think anything really came of it. And then they basically gut the military. They gut healthcare, and then they just started dumping money back into it, which again is just money laundering. You get rid of all of your conservatives within your unions. You stifle them all out, and then you bring in your own people. So in the mid 90s, we were changing all of our leadership from conservative to bleeding heart liberals. And that turned us into the 2000s, which now we have a huge deficit, and our Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin were both basically run out of politics, out of Canada because they were so corrupt. And in comes Stephen Harper to redirect the GST tax, to infrastructure, to redirect the gas tax back into cities. And the Conservative government, led by Stephen Harper, then put money back into the systems. So I know in Winnipeg, we got a brand new arena. We got a brand new library. Some of our streets started to improve. We got a little baseball stadium. Like you could tell, infrastructure was moving again. Now that didn't come easy. Between Brian Mulroney and Stephen Harper, we had to put up with, I believe that was the time when we had to put up with the Reform Party and other fringe left-wing parties before everybody could get on, fringe right-wing parties, so everybody could get on the same page. Because the right-wing, the Conservatives, you had to be an Alberta Conservative, which is pro-oil and gas, but you also had to win over the Ontario Conservative, which is the old elites. You had to win over the Quebec Conservative. So it was just like today, our Conservative parties was split depending where you were. If you're on the prairies, you cared about the farmers. If you're in Alberta, you cared about the gas industry. If you're in BC, you cared about the environment. If you cared in Ontario, you just cared about yourself. You cared about bureaucracy. And if you're in Quebec, you were hard done by, and everybody had to worry about what you thought. So, and buy your vote off. So it was a long fight to even get Stephen Harper in. So as soon as Stephen Harper gets in, what happens? 9/11, war in Afghanistan, weapons of mass destruction, war in Iraq, and next thing you know, our Conservative government is now a wartime government again, which always happens. And he was rolling right along, our economy was rolling right along, but unfortunately, Stephen Harper lined up some of his policies with George Bush and the oil tycoon Republicans, I would say, the establishment Republicans, and I can't remember what the bill was, a C something or other, but one of the bills he was going to sneak through was basically spying on your own people, which we now find out was happening. Canada's, like, we were taking turns spying on each other's people for each other. So that basically, the media just jumped on that. The left-wing media jumped on that and basically made Stephen Harper just basically George Bush Sr., or George Bush's lackey, which he kind of was. And next thing you know, our Conservatives were getting marked with the Republican brush, and that stained them for 10 years. And then in comes Justin Trudeau talking about freedom and how the Conservatives set back democracy, and kind of the same rhetoric you hear from Biden, the same rhetoric you heard from Barack Obama. And now in Canada, our Conservatives are basically fragmented depending where you are in the country. So that's where we are. We're now with Pierre Poilievre, who is in a weird situation. To wrap this video up, to go from Brian Mulroney to Stephen Harper to now Pierre Poilievre as the big leader, he has a tough position in 2023. As a conservative, I would like somebody to attack woke culture, kind of like a Ron DeSantis. But unfortunately, in Canada, we are so brainwashed. He can't come up with those. He can't come out with those phrases. He can't say going against CRT. He can't say going against woke culture. He can't say going against the other liberal issues that are going on right now, because the media has linked all of those issues to misogyny, to extremism, to hate. So when he goes to Alberta, he can talk about a lot of those points because Alberta is based with them. But then I watch him come to Nanaimo, BC on the island, because I'm on Vancouver Island, and I watch him come to Nanaimo, and he basically sounds like a liberal politician. Other than denouncing the WEF, and everybody cheers, oh yay, oh yay, but he's still for mass immigration. He doesn't think there's enough population here to take on the new economy, which we've just given up on 2 generations. You're saying we've given up on 2 generations. Like, why can't we work with the people we have here and employ the people we have here and educate the people we have here? So again, I'm not 100% sold on him, but he has a tough task of going to Quebec and sounding one way, and going to Ontario and having to talk another way, and going to Alberta and BC and having to speak another way. And then you go to Manitoba, where I'll make another video about that another time, about provincial conservatives. But Selinger cried about the vaccine and cried about the pandemic. Woo-hoo! So we've already shown that there's no conservatism in Manitoba. Like, it's done. So hence why that's where the next Freedom Convoy is supposed to be. Apparently they're going to be heading there in January and February, because maybe Manitoba needs to wake up a little bit. But that's my video. That's the first video of the year. I just want to talk about conservatism, because right now, with the Speaker of the House taking place, and there's Donald Trump, and there's Matt Gaetz fighting the good fight, and there's McCarthy, who looks like he's a rhino and trying to get pushed into the Speaker of the House just to keep the status quo and just to kind of get things rolling. But there's 20 MAGA Republicans who want either Byron Donalds, or they want the gentleman from, escapes my name, my head right now, from Ohio. But they basically want a MAGA candidate. And now Trump is supporting McCarthy, which just makes me shake my head. So, I don't know. The conservatism and the Republican movement right now and the MAGA movement right now is at an interesting crossroads. So, but that's my thoughts on the matter. Hit subscribe, hit like, hit a comment, tell me what you think, and I'll be back later. Cheers.